themselves. So Shea Justice, whose work is these three panels over here. Shea is a MFA 2012? 2012, as is Rob. And if you want to just say a couple words about your work?
A lot of my work is political, dealing with American history. I tend to deal with stuff that happens now in the contemporary art history, but part of my shift has been also looking in contextually as to what has happened in American history prior. So a lot of it is me revisiting the Constitution when it was written, as well as some of the things from then compared to what's going on now, and are we staying true to the things that the Founding Fathers said? The Founding Fathers being people who were actually slave owners. So where does it matter, these things about freedom, equality, and justice, how does it matter in the contemporary context? So my work is a combination of that now.
Great, thanks. And we're gonna hear more about everyone's work as well. Joseph, Martina, who has been painting for 20 years, I think that's so fantastic. Just tell us a brief little bit about yourself and.
Sure, thanks. First of all, I appreciate you guys waiting to try to explain. Thank everybody for that. I'm an interdisciplinary artist, maybe experimental artist, but I was a painter exclusively for 20 years. And my work is.
We're gonna ask the question. We're gonna have some questions, some really thoughtful questions. If I start with Robert, that's okay?
Sure.
Shay's work.
Sure. Yeah. Shea, if you don't mind.
Tom and Shea.
Going first? Sure.
All right. So, kind of three questions, so two questions with like a follow-up. All right. No, since the smaller number sounds better. One of your major works, which is ongoing, is a continuous series of drawings on a large scroll. These drawings convey an immediate editorial response to current political events. Your current work denotes quite a shift, showing a definitive change in format, formal approach in your tools and materials, and conceptual approach in mining historical events as opposed to today's news. Please tell us a little bit about these changes, or these shifts, if you will, and how or why they manifested.
Should I start talking about the scroll itself?
Because
people may not even know.
Background, yeah.
In 2003, when the United States invaded Afghanistan, or the build-up towards that, the school I taught at, there was at the time a really strong conservative element of people who were like, if you're with us, if you're not with us, you're against us, support Bush, don't say nothing, be good Americans. And a couple of people had challenged me without me having to say anything, and they asked me, was I pro-American or was I pro-Sudan? And sarcastically, I said, you know what, I'll take some notes and I'll get back to you. I had all these materials from from college when I went to BU that the professor had us purchase that we never used. One of it being these long scrolls. So I started saying, okay, D-Day comes when the invasion starts, I'll just start writing it down. And my assumption was when we invaded Afghanistan, when we invaded Iraq, it would end in a couple of years, which most wars happen. I didn't realize at the time that the war in Afghanistan was gonna continue to this day, 17 plus years. So I said, well, most of those people graduated or got to other jobs, but I'm gonna keep working on this. When it's done and I have an exhibit, somehow I'll locate them and be like, all right, here's my thoughts on the war. So I've continually worked on it, and at this point, it's hard for me to estimate it without sounding like P.T. Barnum, but it's about close to 2.5 miles in length on these scrolls. That's what I had been working on when I went into graduate school in 2012. I brought this with me as the project I was working on, and I realized also it was such a defining thing. I had hardly done anything else for a number of years except for that. And at a certain point, a close friend of mine, because some of the stuff is images from pop culture, stuff that I grew up on, stuff that I appreciated. And a close friend of mine, I wish he was here now, but he's not, named Joseph Jones, he would help me transport this thing to comic conventions. And if I had a chance to meet Captain Kirk from Star Trek, William Shatner, or the guy that played James on Good Times, the dad, John Amos, we would bring this thing there and say, we'd be honored if you signed it. So I started getting different people to sign it, just because I was like, well, if I drew them on there, it would be kind of cool to get them to sign an autograph on it too and explain it to them. So it started to gradually become not just this illustrated thing, but people who were represented on it. I started meeting veterans who had lost limbs at the hospital that's not that far from where I live. The Veterans Hospital is not that far from where I live in Jamaica Plain, Massachusetts. So at one point I brought it there because I had done a bunch of studies and drawings on vets who had lost their legs and their limbs. And I said, you know, I'd be honored if you said something about your thoughts on the war, and I'd write it down and you could sign some of these drawings. So they were like, oh my God, this is great, absolutely. So I've continued working on it. When I was in graduate school, I was encouraged to try other things, obviously, expand your practice, although I kind of knew by the end, when I was leaving, my thesis defense would be about the scroll and what I've done with it and all these other things. So I started working in three-dimensional work, taking copies of the Confederate flag, cutting and pasting it, adding small Civil War characters to it, dolls to it, you know, toy army men and all these other things, and then showing images in the red of the Confederate flag of black people who've been enslaved and murdered and killed, children and adults. Because you always hear, oh, well, it's our heritage. And I say, well, let's explore this further. What does that mean to you versus what does it mean to me and my family? My family's from Virginia. Cradle of the South, Harrisonburg, well, most of us Harrisonburg or Richmond. So I was like, I want to explore this further. What does it mean for my family, my grandparents, and my family before that? And so a couple of years ago, I usually go downtown Boston and I start sketching and drawing things from Boston's tradition. Oh, we got the tall ships and we have all these wonderful things because we're the cradle of freedom and Boston Massacre and all these other things. And I started going into the stores where they sell things for people who have been out of state, who say, well, I want a replica of Boston's freedom and all these other things. And I started noticing all these giant copies of the Constitution and these copies of the Articles of Confederation, Lincoln's speech, Gettysburg Address, and all these other things. I started taking an interest in reading them and studying them and looking at what they meant versus how does that apply to us now and today. And so gradually I started going into collage with them and cutting and pasting and starting to add images of, well, yeah, that's then, and this is supposed to be what was supposed to be what makes us great Americans, but what is it in reality for all of us in 2019, 2017, 2016? True. So that's the stuff that you see there, and that's my evolution. I know with the scroll, I'm still trying to figure out how to exhibit something of that length, size, dimension, and eventually I will. I mean, I'm 48, I'll probably be done when I'm about 80, especially in the administration we're living in now. I'm not going to be done no time. But that's where I'm at right now. So I pause from it and try to work in other things. So I also do a lot of three-dimensional work that's not in the show. But I've started taking interest in, okay, I can talk about what's happening now, but what if there are people who don't know what happened then because our textbooks or schools or whatever don't really teach it to us in a way that we know. Yeah. So I'm like, well, I take an interest into it. What is it? The boring stuff you don't even know about history or you weren't taught? I find it fascinating to try to explore it. You know, and sometimes my students will challenge me on it or ask me questions in my classroom and stuff, and I just go, yeah, I can't stand Calvin Coolidge. I can't stand this person, that person. They go, really? And I go into it in a little bit more in depth, and they go, wow, you did say you were an art teacher, right? Because I get into the historical. So that's how I started to get to where I'm at now.
All right. Well, this next question, you kind of touch upon a lot of stuff that's in this next question, but this is kind of an opportunity to expand on it a little bit. So again, using the scroll work as a reference point, those drawings are a kind of reportage with you responding to contemporary events as they happen. Your dialogue within these socio-political incidents is made explicit in many instances through your own handwritten commentary. So you write a lot in there. Alongside the images, the writing is your own, but with the new work in this show, we see the text is one that's very grounded in American history, one that most Americans are familiar with, not all, mind you, at least conceptually. And this sets up a different narrative within the piece as compared to what you did in the scroll. So how does that affect your own dialogue within the work?
With the scroll, I speak my own voice going through it. With this, a lot of it is headlines and things like that. I let it speak for itself. For instance, the one with Frederick Douglass and Ida B. Wells Barnett, if you look on the bottom right, instead of our founding fathers, I ended up listing a number of people who have been victims of police brutality who were innocent. It speaks for itself. That sometimes, I also have reached a point where with the scroll thing, I say so much, and I'm constantly talking about how I feel, what I think, and what I'm observing based on the facts as I'm learning them and they're being presented to me. But there's a part of me that goes, it speaks for itself. I didn't know ahead of time, for instance, the Sojourner Truth one on the end, I didn't know ahead of time that before I finished it, that when Donald Trump became president, that they were automatically, the Treasury Department was like, oh, we're not gonna put Harriet Tubman on 20, which is not. I had a feeling, I was like, oh, they're not gonna put her on there. She's an American hero, an American original who represents everything that goes with the terms live free or die. But they're not gonna respect that because she's a black woman.
Amen.
So, that's why that ended up getting those kinds of things. I'm like, at a certain point, when I start working outside of what I've been doing, my attitude has been, it should speak for itself. Some of the headlines that I include in there in terms of the things that happen challenging black people's voting rights in the 21st century, it should speak for itself. Now, if we have to have a conversation where I talk about the decision by Roger Taney that led to the Civil War of black men have no rights that white men are required to respect, then we can get to a much, much broader, longer conversation. I would certainly hope by the presentation of my work, people start to ask those questions themselves. Because at a certain point, yeah, I can talk, and if I display the scroll, you're gonna hear me talk for miles. But there's a part of me that's like, it just goes what I was saying. Look what's happening now. So that's part of the change or the shift. Less said, the more posted, the more people can just pick up for it. And then if they have questions, I can answer them myself.
Thank you. I just want to add that in one of the classes that I teach over at UConn, we were talking about, it's a foundation, like an introduction course about studio concepts, and we were talking about documentation. And for young artists who are
familiar in famous text and famous images as frameworks and juxtaposed together, which you rendered and collaged into it. And not just your expectations of the writer. I also want to include, what is your hope?
What is my hope? Well, what is my hope? I'm not particularly old, I'm middle-aged or whatever, I'm not 80s or 90s years old, so I would say this at this point in my life. My hope is that eventually, there's something I've known since I was a child growing up that I've been aware of, but I never really paid much attention to it until I started getting older and examining it. And that's the limitations of, in the media, how much a person of color is allowed to speak. There comes a point where when you do talk about your thoughts, your feelings, your views, your opinion, your history, at a certain point, someone white or someone non-black is going to say, you're making me uncomfortable, I didn't own slaves, you need to stop because you're hurting my feelings.
Yeah.
My challenge is, if I ever display the scroll in its entirety and the content of all my work in a given situation, number one, I want it to be incessantly from one length of space all the way to the other without any bends, corners, cut, or anything else. And the challenge is this to a person who would read it from 2003 till 2000 and whenever. Are you willing to sit and listen to the thoughts, views, opinions, and experiences of a man of color or a black man over the course of several years who addresses the issues of environmental damage, war, military, bad education, all these horrible systematic things that happen that affect us, but not only us, but other people around us? And are you willing to challenge yourself, say, I'll listen to it and I'll pay attention to what he has to say? Because you're not gonna get it on CNN, you're definitely not gonna get it on Fox News or MSNBC. They have sound bites, they're cut down to sound bites. How bad do you even care? Because some people, I don't wanna hear all this stuff. You're just a liberal or you're just trying to be mad or you're an angry black man. Read it in its entirety.
Yeah.
Because yes, I have moments and I have things that I'm very angry and I'm impassioned about. But that didn't stop me from also on the scrolls talking about how much I loved the Banana Splits TV show when I was a kid, or Evel Knievel, or Batman TV show, or some of these other things that I mentioned of my upbringing and my childhood. one of my favorite memories is going to my grandparents' house in Harrisonburg when I was a kid. And when we were all playing outside, if any of us came into the house and let that door slam, one of the people, the adults in the living room would start yelling at us from the kitchen. Don't let the door slam! And just remembering, don't let the door slam. It was a great memory for a lot of us when we were kids. And going to the park and all these other things. So I try to reflect as much of experience as possible. And I was inspired by Robert Crumb when I saw the documentary years ago. People hated him because of his racism, his misogyny, and his unfiltered illustrations, saying some of the most nastiest illustrated stuff. And yet there was a part of me that's like, well, he got to say whatever he wants. No matter how people are going to respond or take it, he got to say whatever he wants. So for me, my hope is people can look at my work, and no matter how unfiltered it is, how uncomfortable it makes them feel, fine, be mad. But this is me as a black man, as an American, saying what I want to say. Unfiltered, not worrying about if someone's going to say you're angry, you're militant, you hate white people, you hate this, this, and this. No, this is who I am. So that's something that I would hope, if I did have a show that was on that, in that context, I would certainly hope it would be up for 2 or 3 months. Because it's a lot to read. A lot of my stuff is text-based and illustrated. So I'm like, it would have to be up for a while and everything like that. For the people who are here also, I brought in copies of a year's worth of it if people want to purchase that my cousin Malcolm has here in the front. That's a shameless plug. I still want to get a copy of what I'm even talking about. But it's a year's worth of the scroll with the based in the time period that we all remember when we had the words hope and change.
Yep.
Been a long time since we heard that. So if anyone's interested in getting copies, they're right there. But I was like, oh, bring copies, because people may want to know exactly what it is that I'm even talking about.
And there's also a great YouTube video.
YouTube,
There's a great YouTube of Shea, with Jason, right? With Jason?
Jason Frames,
Frames
yes.
talking about the scroll project, and I encourage you to spend some time. It's an hour long, but it's worth every minute. So, thanks.
Oh, thank you, Shea.